James Gesualdi is an attorney who concentrates on legal, regulatory, and related matters. Some, he's too modest to say this, but some say he is the nation's leading expert on the U.S. Animal Welfare Act. He has served as chair of New York State Bar Association Committee on Animals and the Law. He's founding co-chair of the Suffolk County Bar Association Animal Law Committee, vice chair of the American Bar Association Young Lawyers Division for Animal Protection Committee, special professor of law at Hofstra University, on the faculty of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums Zoo School for zoo professionals, special counsel on the Marine Mammal Working Group, Reintroduction of Marine Mammals to the Wild, and he's participated in the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Animal Plan, the APHIS Marine Mammal Negotiated Rulemaking. His work has been profiled in the American Bar Association Journal, the New York Times, New York Law Journal, Newsday, Long Island Business, and Careers in Animal Law. Jim Gesualdi.
Thank you, Mike, for that introduction. 18 years ago, I asked a key leader in the marine mammal community what I could do to do more work in the marine mammal and zoological world. And at that time, she told me it'd be helpful to learn more about the Animal Welfare Act. Today, I'm here to tell you that, like Michelangelo, I am still learning. So I hope to get through my presentation quickly enough that I can take advantage of the brain power assembled here, as I have feasted on the ideas that have been shared. Before going further, though, I would like to thank Al and Nora Gress for making this event, and particularly my participation, possible. I'd like to thank Mike Noonan and Tiffany Fusak for all their help in trying to prepare me for today, and also the distinguished colleagues here who have shared freely of their time outside of the conference. In preparing, I was quite nervous, particularly Thursday morning before I left. My black lab, Memphis Grace, yes, her name is a living tribute to Elvis, was at my side and awfully quiet, more so than usual. So I thought, could this be that perhaps she's looking ahead and thinking that she might be missing me? Or could it just be that she's seen my presentation and is concerned about how I might do? So there's at least one Labrador Retriever back on Long Island who is hopeful that you will be receptive, if not merciful, with regard to my presentation. That being said, I'd like to note a number of the panelists were very helpful in touching upon things that are part of the regulatory framework. Monica talked about CITES and other international conventions. Jesse referred to standing to bring litigation. I'm going to try and simplify and condense and be focused particularly on the Animal Welfare Act, because that's the day-to-day cornerstone of how zoos are regulated federally here in the United States. And in doing so, I hope that some of what we may share today will be helpful in a constructive manner. And it's been fascinating to see how we have been talking about desired outcomes and end products, whether they be 50 or 100 years out. And one of the things that I try to do on a daily basis is look at process and how do we get to the things that we want, and how do we make it effective and sustainable in terms of the behaviors we want. And building on the very insightful and enjoyable talks throughout these 2 days, and Keith's presentation this morning on education, my favorite quote on that is from John Ruskin. And it's simply that education is not teaching people what they do not know, but rather education is teaching people to behave as they do not behave. That, to me, is what I hope to do in the next 15 minutes. This conference, as with my work, which has evolved every single day as my sensitivities to things have changed and evolved, as the law has changed and evolved, is a beginning. And as James Allen said, life is full of beginnings. They're presented every day and every hour to every person. Most beginnings are small and appear trivial and insignificant, but in reality, they are the most important things in life. A little history lesson on the Animal Welfare Act, a very brief one. In 1966, so we're going back 46 years, not quite 50, the Laboratory Animal Welfare Act was enacted by Congress in part because of concerns over people's pets being stolen and being collected by and sold by random dealers to research facilities. And so one of the avowed purposes of the Animal Welfare Act is to protect people's interests in their pets. It was only in 1970, 42 years ago, that the Animal Welfare Act was amended to include exhibitors. A few interesting quotes to give you a perspective on how advanced Congress was, perhaps, in 1970, or how far society has come in the succeeding 42 years. And these are quotes from the House report. I don't believe there was a Senate or conference report on the 1970 amendments. The report noted, this reflects our continuing commitment to the ethic of kindness to dumb animals. This is a statutory mandate that small, helpless creatures deserve the care and protection of a strong and enlightened public. Congress, the House committee, continued. It is an effort to demonstrate America's humanity to lesser creatures. Initially was controversial, but which by virtue of good reason and goodwill and deliberation and discussion by many persons of divergent views was able to command the unanimous approval of the House Agriculture Committee. And further, it establishes by law the humane ethic that animals should be accorded the basic creature comforts. And that is what the Animal Welfare Act does. Over the years, the Animal Welfare Act has been marked by, as noted here in 1970, by conflict and controversy. Sometimes that's an outgrowth of the things that are not included in the Animal Welfare Act, meaning farm animals for one, except in certain forms of exhibition, and also the effectiveness of how the Act may work. Today, as I see it from my humble perch in the legal world, there are lots of factors already affecting our regulatory environment, and their impact will only increase over time. The first is animals, and with all due respect to Paul and Ken and others, I use animals as a shorthand, adhering to the law in New York State, which defines animals as all living creatures other than human beings. I don't do that out of arrogance. I just do that out of shorthand and convenience. So please note that. To me, it is all about the animals in the fact that whether it's wildlife, zoo wildlife, or the Gress's cats, my dog Memphis, we have these relationships with animals in our life. It could be the herps or spiders that Keith interacted with as a young boy. In my case, it might be the dolphin that I spent a lot of time with 23 years ago when I first started this. That passion, which fortunately has fueled my work, is also something that factors into the culture shift that we are experiencing every day. Many people in this room are a part of it. Some people in this room may be resisting it, but it's happening. And zoos have contributed to that a bit. And one of the most remarkable descriptions of this is in I think it was a 2007 book by Mark Penn called Microtrends, the 50 small trends that are shaping the future of America. Why is that significant? It's significant because Mark Penn was the Clinton strategist who coined the term soccer moms way back when. And what he determined is that in our society, which today we have more households in the United States that have companion animals or pets than have children. And because of that, it's again another factor in our daily life that's changing how we look at animals, our relationships, and that factors into the law. And for anyone that I've worked with in the zoological world who may think this is sometimes too attenuated, I don't think so, and I'll deal with that further. Science, our understanding of what we know and what we do not know, which is something Paul speaks about beautifully in his book, Animal Rights, What You Should Know, is something that, again, is being factored in, because as we know more, it affects our values, it affects how we see things, and eventually, and perhaps the law or the regulatory framework is what some would consider a lagging indicator, but eventually these things are reflected there. Animal law, the field of animal law. I've defined for many years animal law as legal matters involving non-human animals. There have been countless definitions of what animal law is proffered within the legal community. Many of them are centered on animal protection or uniquely animal characteristics. I suggest that my simple definition is the most accurate one, because if you teach as Paul and I do, or you read the casebook or the cases, all kinds of unlikely sources of law that one would not think relate to animals or live animals are being used in animal law. So I think to define it any more narrowly than that is just not correct. Why is animal law such a big thing? Well, you have people like those here on our panel who have written books, written articles, given talks like this. We have over, I think it's 120 or 130 law schools that teach animal law now. I think 30 or so approximately Bar Association animal law committees. And these are often very much dominated by particular perspectives. And sometimes they're wonderful outlets for professional discourse and constructive exchange, but if you're not involved, it's hard to be a part of that. And that's something that I've learned over the years and tried to do more and more constructively. As I mentioned, zoological institutions themselves have shaped and will shape this future. In my view, again, this is my personal opinion, not on behalf of anyone I've worked with, known, dined with, or anything like that. The role of zoological institutions into the future will depend on a couple of things. One, the degree of proactive thinking, like today and yesterday, and action. Second, how outstanding that thinking and action is. And I thought it was fascinating, the comment about leadership, because I think the zoological world, just like many worlds, including the legal world, could benefit from more explicit leadership development beyond what may happen on an ad hoc basis, beyond what may happen in individual institutions, but nationally and globally. Because it's only through that that we get additional tools by which to grow. Finally, in terms of the zoological institutions, how their role becomes of greater importance in the future, whether it be science, conservation, education, again, will determine the input in the future. Reinventing the zoological world. there are a number of things that have implications for the regulatory framework and for the day-to-day activities, which are very, very challenging, keeping animals healthy, alive, attending to their welfare, as Ron focused on yesterday. And to me, if we want to talk about law, and being that Canisius is a Catholic institution, St. Paul said the greatest of these is love. And certainly, I think everyone here has a love and respect for animals. We all manifest it in different ways. And it's sometimes striking to me how that gets lost in either the discussion or the cross-criticism or the polarization of issues. And I always go back to what Tom French wrote in Zoo Story, and that is that the zookeeper is the conscience of the zoo. And if that is true, as I believe it to be true, that should be one of the foundations of the future of zoos, maintaining that, enhancing that. Again, care, continuous improvement, as Ron and others had suggested. Again, and here I was grateful, since I did not want to modify the ideas in this PowerPoint. I was grateful that Ron noted distinctions between animal care and welfare. And training, we've heard training talked about in a number of different ways, some positive, some less so. And to me, training is one of the absolute keys on a multiple of levels. But in terms of animals, the primary importance of training is for their own care and husbandry, also for behavioral enrichment. And when you contrast that with some of the ways training can be, particularly in a zoo context, portrayed in some of the animal law literature, it's almost always negative. However, there are other contexts in which, in the same animal law literature, training is portrayed as valuable. Training of a service dog, training of a dog that has been killed and there's a veterinary malpractice claim, and someone wants to allege greater damages. They may throw in the training. Maybe the greatest example is the rehabilitation of Michael Vick's fighting dogs. Same principles of operant conditioning, but different applications. So I think people need to be careful of some of the characterizations or definitions of some of these things. And this blends into the law, and it factors into the Animal Welfare Act, as I'll get to. Research, and Don this morning, absolutely wonderful in terms of the research, and again, as Kathy said, the measurable conservation impact. To me, and this was an idea from an offline conversation last night with Mike, the greatest use of research could be a partnership, perhaps between critics of the zoological world, and USDA APHIS, to authorize ongoing research which basically involves changes in animal care procedures and to see if they have a measurable benefit or not. Why do I say a partnership with all that? So that we break down these walls that, as Paul would say, would imprison us and give us tools to find ways to make things better for the animals in our care. I don't think any of us would disagree about the concept. It's getting there, and that's why we would need USDA permission, because reflective of the question I asked Ron yesterday, under the General Handling Regulation 9 CFR 2.131, one of the performance standards there is that you cannot subject an animal to behavioral stress. Ron made the distinction between stress and distress, or as the General Handling Regulation continues, unnecessary discomfort. Improving the Animal Welfare Act, very quickly. Again, the history of the Animal Welfare Act is one of challenge and conflict. Some of it is unavoidable and necessary. We need to take a closer and deeper look at that. This is, after all, a cause and effect universe. And a couple of words of wisdom here. And I think the exchange that we've had these last few days has factored into this. In the words of the great American philosopher Jimmy Buffett, sort of paraphrasing the lyrics of Mañana, where he says, don't say Mañana if you don't mean it. He also says, don't describe the scenery if you haven't seen it. Actually, he says, don't describe a Kiss concert if you haven't seen it, but scenery makes more sense. Again, St. Francis, the patron saint of animals. And I think the one line from that prayer of St. Francis that would have the greatest impact on the future regulatory framework would be, in essence, you know, O Master, grant that I may never seek so much to be understood as to understand. And finally, and I think this is what forms the constructive nature of this program, in the words of that great Canisius professor, Michael Noonan, in talking about his work with orcas, the animals engaged in a pro-social affiliative behavior shortly after the period of tension. So I hope whatever intellectual tension we've had here will continue to have that kind of professional exchange. The mutual gains approach is really what I think is the key to the next 50 years in terms of the regulatory framework. Why is that? Well, because regulations in the United States, even more so today because of limited government and heightened conflict, take a long time to wind their way through. So as a first and underlying concept, we should look to everyone's shared interest, our common interest, and look beyond the positions. I'm for this at this facility, or I'm against this in the zoological world. Let's peel that back and see, and I think if you looked at the websites of some of the groups and individuals represented here, you could parse together a common mission statement. In terms of the Animal Welfare Act, some specific tools, and then I want to get to some questions. Examples of building consensus include the marine mammal negotiated rulemaking. And that was a consensus building exercise which had all stakeholders represented at the table. And within 2 years of negotiating sessions and then a few more years to publish a proposed rule and a final rule, 60% of the marine mammal regulations were revised without litigation. And the rest of the regulations have not yet been revised. And that was, it took 5 years. And a lot of back and forth, and it was one of the most informative experiences I've ever had in my life. In addition, a few years back, a number of disparate stakeholders that don't often see things the same way came together and went to Congress and asked for more funding for APHIS, for the Administration and Enforcement of the Animal Welfare Act. The fact that that happened and the fact that that resonated with Congress, and I will say parenthetically about the Animal Welfare Act and about APHIS, if you look at what happens under the Animal Welfare Act on a daily basis, and you look at the political demands placed on the agency, and you weight them, and then you weight the resources that they're given, given all the political interest and political demands, there really should be a lot more in resources there. And that's not the fault of the agency, but they are on the receiving end on a daily basis about that. Training, there are lots of specific ways that training can be improved. I know there was discussion yesterday about the lack of your senior people or not having senior people or turnover. And some of the training requirements under the Animal Welfare Act are unbelievable and, because they're not there. And ironically, the most detailed training requirements are in the research community in some ways and in the marine mammal community. And ironically and parenthetically, in terms of marine mammals, we've talked about, I'll come back to that at the end as I finish this, encourage and reinforce good behavior. There are a bunch of tools that I could suggest to anyone's zoo here or to the agency that can be done with practices that exist today without changing regulations, saving government money, that would improve animal welfare today. The first one would be you have an inspection report. The inspection report 21 days later is posted online. One thing I've advocated for years is a mechanism for self-certified compliance reporting. This would not obviate the need for a follow-up inspection, but what it would do would be provide a vehicle for a certified or licensed professional, better yet, because then it becomes self-executing in terms of enforcement, to certify that things have been remedied and have that on file with USDA and online immediately. What would that do for good-intentioned facilities or anyone feeling the heat of public criticism? They would be on record as having corrected that long before the follow-up inspection. If you're concerned about non-compliant items, I would think you'd be concerned about them being remedied sooner rather than later. There are many other things that can be done substantively. One of the things I know Kathy and IDA did a few years ago was petition for a rulemaking on elephants, which generated a massive document when the agency published that. And a final notion is a project I've been working on for about 2 years called Excellence Beyond Compliance, in light of an announcement from the agency in Friday's Federal Register, where they're holding not just animal care, but all of APHIS. They're holding a stakeholder meeting in Washington on the 27th to discuss some of the budgetary and other challenges. So this notion of excellence beyond compliance simply is that in dealing with the future of zoos, the future of animal welfare, you've got the Animal Welfare Act and its minimum standards, which again can be a blessing or a curse. The blessing is that they allow for innovation because they're performance-based. So though they're minimum, you can do more. You're not prohibited from doing that. Secondly, you have, in some cases, you have AZA or Alliance of Marine Mammal Parks and Aquariums accreditation as an overlay, and excellence beyond compliance would go above and beyond that. The irony I just wanted to note as I'm out of time on marine mammals is that under the Animal Welfare Act, if you exhibit animals to the public, you must be licensed. There is no right for a zoo to exist per se. It's a license that can be suspended or revoked by USDA. There is no express educational requirement there. There is an educational requirement, ironically, in the Marine Mammal Protection Act for conservation education. And one of the things that's interesting about the humane education effort that Ron has is that here in New York State, we do have a humane education law. And another thing educationally in terms of regulatory framework is under state law to have the zoos tie in further with humane education, especially in states like New York. Thank you, Mike, and I'm sorry this went longer than I anticipated.